Guys, so we're going to talk about MIDI filtering today, right, and building these MIDI filter racks. And the gist of what a MIDI filter is it will take incoming MIDI notes and it'll split them into different chains, right, and then it will do, or it has the potential to do different things for each MIDI note, right, so it could differently pitch shift them, you could put an ARP on one of them to make like little rolls for snares or whatever it is. Right, there's a million ways you could do it, but that's the gist of it. It's taking incoming notes and splitting them into chains. So let's take a look at this. This one's laid out for a drum rack, right? So each of these color blocks would correspond to a different page, like a 4x4 page, like over here. So I have this guy. This is called a MIDI twister. It's by DJ Tech Tools. They make great hardware. Not paid by them or anything like that. I just love their hardware. Right, and these knobs, right, all these knobs are also buttons, and I have these buttons to play MIDI notes that correspond to the basic drum rack, right? So to show you an example, right, I can play this in, right, I'm just playing from the bottom up, right, and you can see over here, right, that it's just going up chromatically like you would expect. Cool. Well, take a look at this MIDI filter over here, right? You can see the red dot at the top of that key roll, piano roll, right, corresponding to the notes I'm pressing. Well, the first thing to note is if I'm pressing, say, this C, right, you can see it pop up here. Well, if I turn this off, the note will never reach the drum rack, right? So you can filter things out by just turning the devices off. And the other thing worth noting is if you don't have this in the first place, watch if I just delete this. It still never reaches the drum rack. So you really need MIDI representation for all the keys if you want the keys to pass through into the drum rack. That's why I have these through blocks that you can turn on to pass through notes that are outside of what would come in on this, right? I just have them turned off by default. So the other thing you could do is you can put things into these chains, right? So we're hitting this chain right now, and what we could do is grab a MIDI effect, like a pitch effect, for instance. Pitch is probably the one that I use the most often in this application. Right, but now as I twist this knob, you'll notice over here the yellow arrow move, and what I'm basically doing is I'm causing this button to correspond to different drum cells in the drum rack. Right, so I do this extensively with my Octapad. It's an 8-pad drum pad that you would play with drumsticks, right? And instead of messing with all the MIDI controls on the drum pad, I actually just twist a knob on a rack and I can like swap out in one go all the bottom pads or all the top pads. I actually have those racks over here. So this one would just do what I just showed you, which is change the pitch of a given pad. This will actually exchange the pads with each other. It's really clever. This one, this is kind of the bread and butter here. But this will shift out the entire bottom row to different presets. And I'm actually going to do a different video on sort of this approach of creating preset knobs, because I don't see anybody else doing that. That's a sort of a technique that I mostly invented myself. As you can see on the left on the notes section, I edited info text. Where is that? Edit info text. You can type in stuff there. So I described what all these different things are that correspond to the different presets that I use on my drum layout. So I'm going to show you one more thing that you might use this for, and then I'm going to send this to all of you guys, right? So there will be a link in the description to be able to get this whole project, or at least the racks from within the project. I don't know if I'll save the whole project, just because it's easier just to have the devices. So this Note Picker 64, it's really nice. So if you've ever had a push or something like that, you can turn into like scale mode or whatever, where you're like playing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, as opposed to, chromatically, right? So without this on, if I'm trying to play melodies out on this guy, let me go up an octave, right? It's all chromatic, right? It's hitting every single note. Writing a melody on this would be a pain because I'm going to have to skip just the right knobs, and who knows what knobs to skip, right? It's a pain. So this solves that problem, and it's basically like scale mode for any 4-pad controller like this. You could even use it for one of those 64-pad controllers if you wanted. But basically, of your scale, you have your root, and then you have the, so do would be your root, re would be your 2, mi, etc. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, you don't have sharp or flat 1s, but you do have sharp and flat 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7s. Right, so this lets you flat and sharp those according to what you'd want to use it in music theory. And basically, if you don't know modal theory, definitely learn modal theory. I'm going to do a video just on that and talk about how modes relate to chords and how to think about that. It's really useful. It's kind of like a foundation of jazz harmony and stuff as well. So for instance, minor has a flat 3, so you notice this is 1 semitone down from major, right? It has a flat 3, flat 6, and flat 7 relative to major, right? So if I'm playing out scales on this now, we can bring this down an octave. Right, typical Aeolian scale. If I want a harmonic minor, that means a raised 7, so it's like a major 7. Right? If I wanted Phrygian, that has a flat 2 relative to minor. Right? So you can basically get any mode that you want out of this and play it on any 4x4 pad or 64 pad controller. Very useful. There's an add octaves button, there's a transpose. So this is always in C right now, but if you want it to be in like A, you could just go down 3 semitones. If you want to be in C sharp, just go up a semitone. Pretty straightforward. There's also this root shifter in here. If you want where your A is, you could have like your A be over, I guess it'd be up here because I shifted it like 8 semitones. Right, but this would just shift where your root notes are. So I'm going to give this to you guys to reverse engineer. You'll notice that this is laid out a little bit different than this guy, which has all the chains broken out, or this guy, which is all done by notes here, right? So this is like C, D, E, F, etc., as opposed to drum cells. I'm giving this all to you guys. Check the link in the description. But this one's done by octaves, and it just has to do with what's efficient, right? So I'm trying to flat the 2 of every single octave, so it was easier to do it by octaves and then have that macro back to all of those as I copy them through. Way easier that way. So yeah, definitely reverse engineer these. MIDI filters are great. There's a ton of stuff you can do with them, even well beyond the scope of this. But the other nice thing to keep in mind is MIDI processing super efficient, right? MIDI's been around since the 60s. You can have tons of MIDI racks, do tons of MIDI routing, pitch this up, pitch this down. That's like tiny little bits of data, like the smallest amount of data, right? So you can have hundreds of these things, and your computer's not even going to notice it, right? Because our computers are thousands of times more powerful than when MIDI was around originally, right? So the more processing things you can do in MIDI before you hit instruments, the better. Yeah, so enjoy. Definitely like and subscribe, please. I'm going to be giving away a lot more stuff. I've got hundreds of videos I've got planned for you guys. Like so much I want to show you. Everything from like beginner stuff to intermediate stuff to like stuff that's way more advanced than this. Yeah, so definitely subscribe. I'm going to be trying to pump these out. I've got at least over 100 different video ideas written down. So I'm just going to keep them flowing and flowing and flowing. All right, thanks so much, guys. Take care.